I'm Colonel John Bourgeois, the 25th Director of the United States Marine Band, retired. I came to Loyola in 1953 as a young French horn player. I'd graduated from Jesuit High School here in New Orleans, and I left Loyola in 1956 and joined the United States Marine Corps. And following basic training, I went to a band in San Francisco. And then in 1958, I won an audition to the United States Marine Band, the President's Own, in Washington, D.C., both as a horn player and on the arranging staff. I guess my earliest memories of 1958 was being a horn player in an orchestra at the White House for the visit of the young Prince and Princess of Japan during the Eisenhower administration. And the thing that's rather ironic in this memory is that some years later, prior to my retirement, when President Clinton was president, the young Prince and Princess of Japan returned to Washington as the Emperor and Empress of Japan. So we say, the three of us, that we've all advanced in rank. In my relationship with the Marine Band, I was lucky enough to provide music in one way or the other for 9 administrations, starting with President Eisenhower. And then there was a memorable administration which followed, was the young Kennedy administration. Several vibrant memories I recall. I was present at the Pablo Casal's recital. And one of the things that happened that evening, we were the orchestra members playing in the State Hall, and so we went around to the side of the East Room to hear Maestro Casals. And then we went downstairs, and he came down carrying his cello, and he was in tears, and he sort of motioned to have the musicians around him. And he spoke, and we were very surprised that he was speaking English, because he generally avoided doing that, because in fact, the whole idea of his playing that recital was very, very unusual. Yeah, and that was the first time he had been in the United States. He had taken a position since the United States had taken the position that he was contrary in the Spanish Revolution. But he did speak to us in English, and he said, you may wonder why I'm weeping. And we nodded, and he said, I've just played the Song of the Birds, but to me, it is a song of the exile. And so it was a very touching moment. There are many memories in the Kennedy administration. Of course, the horrible day of the assassination and then the funeral following. We were very much involved in that. The Marine Band, at the request of Mrs. Kennedy, led the funeral cortege. Following President Kennedy, we had the Johnson administration. President Johnson was a bit different in many respects, and he was a consummate politician. You might say he's a little gruff at times. And there's a wonderful story that how the director of the band, or the director of the dance band at that time, and the president did not have the total sense of communication. The president had predetermined at a afternoon function that he was going to dance with each of the women of the press corps. However, the word had not been transmitted to the leader of the dance band. And so the group assembled. The ladies were all there, as were the press men, and the dance band was playing. And so the president took first one of the senior girls from the press corps and started dancing. And as he's going around the room, he comes by the leader of the band and he says, faster. So the dance band leader brought the tempo up slightly, and he comes around the room again, he says, faster. And then they increase the tempo again, so he comes around the room and he says faster until it keeps going until they're practically running around the room. And he says, even the point of saying expletive, faster, well, it ended up that they were sort of galloping around the room, and then the medley came to a close, and the president sort of retired. The next day, the leader got a call from the president's aide and said, Captain, what was it that you did last night that so infuriated the President of the United States? And the captain relayed, he said, the conversation. And so he said, I'll be back with you. And about 15 or 20 minutes later, the phone rang again, and the aide said, when the president says faster, he means shorter. In other words, he wanted a brief tune, stop, and he would go to another lady and dance, etc. So the language is a very important thing in communication. Following Johnson, President Nixon. President Nixon did several firsts. He took a string quartet from the band to Russia. It's the first time that had ever happened. And also, we took a group of musicians to Yugoslavia to play a return dinner for President Tito that President Nixon was giving, a small chamber group of about 18 players. We flew on a camouflage plane with the White House china, and it was a rather intriguing and interesting trip. But following the dinner that evening, the president came and spoke to each of the musicians and said how important he felt this was in relations with Yugoslavia and the American people. An important point in my career during the Nixon administration was I was appointed the liaison to the White House for the Marine Band, and so I got to act as a liaison between the White House and entertainment, because the Marine Band provides all of the music in the house generally, and also for the entertainment that is provided during state entertainment. We would provide a ballet orchestra for Berezhnikov, backup for Frank Sinatra, the Carpenters, whoever was appearing. You could be a Vegas show band or a small orchestra, ballet orchestra. And so I acted as liaison with the White House and the Marine Band. Following President Nixon, we went into the Ford administration, and we had more of the same, a very good relationship. The president loved to dance, as did Mrs. Ford, and so we had a lot. We always provided the background music for dancing, and also this was a time of the American bicentennial, and Queen Elizabeth visited the White House, and there is a story that has gone around that I think I must set straight. The event of the Queen's visit, there were Marine musicians everywhere. We had a band on the lawn, a chamber orchestra in the Great Hall, harp and flute in the diplomatic entrance, a string quartet in another area. Then following the dinner and the festivities, there was dancing, but dancing generally is in the hall or in the East Room, but this time it was in the state dining room. And so we had a combo playing businessman bounce music, and generally these are all medleys of Broadway tunes and what have you. And I noticed that there were cameras everywhere. NPR was filming the entire sequence. And so all of a sudden there was sort of a rustle from one room to the other, and the president had taken the Queen and came into the state dining room as the combo was playing. Well, obviously they didn't alter the music. They were playing a Rodgers and Hart medley, which included, unfortunately, at the same time that the president invited the Queen to dance, the tune was "That's Why the Lady's a Tramp." I sort of braced against the wall and thought, well, I wonder if anyone's going to pick this up. Well, they did not at the time. But as I said before, NPR was filming, so some wag did find it on the later, and it wasn't that the band specifically played the music on cue, but it did happen. When President Carter came into office, I also advanced in rank to become an assistant director of the United States Marine Band, and then director of the band in 1979. President Carter had a wonderful feeling for music, And one day when I was conducting the orchestra, I discovered that he was standing right next to me, next to one of the marble columns in the Great Hall. And I concluded what I was playing and felt that the president wanted to talk, and usually you do not initiate the conversation with the president. But I saw that he really wanted to talk. And I'd read right before that the president had classical music piped into his office all the time. And one of the things that he was very fond of was Wagner's Tristan and Isolde. So he said, yes, that was the case. I said, well, Mr. President, I'll have to put Tristan into the book. And to show how exactly he did know his Tristan, he said, well, yes, you should probably put in the prelude to Act 3. And the prelude to Act 3 is strings and English horn, which would have fit the instrumentation of the group that we had there. So he did know his Tristan. And contrary to many reports, President Carter did have Hail to the Chief wherever it was appropriate in the White House. And he did enjoy all music, not just country western. Let's see, following President Carter were the Reagan years. We had a wonderful relationship both with the President and the First Lady. I have a wonderful picture in my office of the President's very first day in office. And he loved to tell little stories. He'd stop and tell you either a little joke or a little story. And he stopped on the way and he says, I just got a letter from a little lady who said that she voted for me. She says, well, now that you won, get to work. And so he's got this signal that I'm going to work. He was wonderfully conversant. And a friend of mine said, you know, the Marine Band and the Marine Band harmonica are sort of a symbol. He said, you know, I read somewhere that President Reagan was a harmonica player. I said, well, okay, but you know, we really don't want to commercialize these things. So, but the friend went on, and he had gotten the Horner Company to make this sort of elaborate gold-plated harmonica with the president's signature on it. And I still didn't want to take that any further than, so I put it into the safe in the usher's office, this harmonica. I guess we go through 2 administrations, and in the last week of the last administration, the president said farewell to his staff. And I thought, well, this might be a great time to give him this harmonica, because I don't really think he plays harmonica. Well, we brought the harmonica out, and I said, Mr. President, we've enjoyed so much being your band, and we'd like to give you this small memento that now, whenever you want Hail to the Chief, here is your own Marine Band harmonica. You can take it with you. And he pulled the harmonica out, and he looked at it sort of quizzically, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, he doesn't play harmonica. And he looked at it, and and I'm thinking, oh, he's going to play the Marines' hymn? He goes, my goodness, Red River Valley, and then again, you know, how poignant. From this valley, they say we are leaving. So he did play harmonica. President Bush was great. Well, not that President Bush is great, but each of the presidents have been wonderful in terms of the band, because it's like, you know, we're the sort of the court musicians at the house, and you really feel like you're part of the family. President Bush would make a point that whatever or whoever the honored guest was, he would always stop by the podium to introduce you to the dignitary and pleasantries. And there's a routine in which whoever the head of state is visiting, when they're receiving, the president takes them, he introduces them to you, and goes on to business. And the First Lady entertains the First Lady at a tea. Well, this particular time was the president of Pakistan, who happened to be Mrs. Bhutto. So it was the first man that Mrs. Bush was entertaining. And so Mrs. Bush comes by, and she does the situation, and it's sort of a great fun thing. She says, "Mr. Bootu, I want you to meet Colonel Bourgeois. Colonel Bourgeois is the pride and joy of the President of the United States." I sort of felt like, like on one of the family dogs that they let pull their ears. But they were wonderful, very wonderful to the band, to me. It was interesting when President Bush and then President Clinton were both together. Former President Bush and President Clinton were attending a gridiron dinner, and in the middle of the two was the president of the Gridiron Club. And traditionally, the Marine Band comes in and plays at the Gridiron Club, the opening of the club dinner. And so the band comes in, and President Bush leans over to the president of the Gridiron Club and says, of all of the things that I've had to do with this job, the Marine Band was my favorite thing of the job. And not, of course, President Clinton didn't necessarily hear this at all, but President Clinton leans over to the president and says, the thing I like most about this job is the Marine Band. So they were both in sync with that. Following President Bush was President Clinton. And you've heard that President Clinton was a band musician, and I've learned this from one of his teachers, one of his band teachers, a mutual friend, Francis Macbeth. And also, when President Clinton was governor of Arkansas, whenever the President of the United States would have the governor's dinner, and I had President Clinton play in the tenor band to play sax for the dancing. So we knew that he did play saxophone. Well, he loved to talk music. He loved to talk band music. And you recall I mentioned the Emperor and Empress of Japan. That particular night, as in the Queen Elizabeth's visit, we had music everywhere. And so the assistant director, Tim Foley, and I were checking on various stations of where the musicians were, because all state dinners are very important, and you don't really take anything for granted, but you want to check things out. And since this was even, let's say, more important, we were checking positions. And so we're running around, and then the internal part of the White House is the elevator that's only used generally by the president, but the chief usher and Tim and I got on, and we're getting off, and there is the president coming to go on. And generally, President Clinton was sort of always late. And he stops and he says, "Oh, sir." He always called me, "Oh, sir." "Yeah, Mr. President." He says, "Hi, let's," he starts talking, and then behind him are the staff and the zip it because he's late, go. And so, but of course, if the president speaks, you reply. And he's reminiscing about this and that. And then he says, "Oh, the other day, you were playing outside of the office on the lawn." And he says, you were playing Vaughan Williams' folk song suite. Now, he says, "Why did you stop playing the second movement?" And well, I didn't have the job. Tim, the assistant, had it. And so I said, "Yes, Major, why did you stop playing?" And Tim said, "Well, Mr. President, the Secret Service had said that you were still working, and the guests were just coming in. They asked," he said, "Well, just hold the music a while until the president finishes working in the office and he's coming out." So, and President, "I wish they wouldn't do that." And then he said, and the people still behind him, like trying to, and so I didn't say anything further. He said, "Oh, by the way, Colonel, if the Queen comes, we should play Crown Imperial." I said, "Yes, Mr. President. However, her coronation march is Orb and Scepter. Her father's was Crown Imperial." And he said, "I know." And he went through the dates. He said, "I know." He says, "But I like Crown Imperial better. Let's play Crown Imperial." So if you're president, you can choose the Queen's coronation march. in President Clinton's term, I chose to retire, and I retired on the band's birthday, which was the 11th of July, and this was the 11th of July, 1996. We had a great ceremony, and I was chosen as the person of the week for Peter Jennings and ABC, and also the president invited my family to the White House for a reception the next day. And it was at the same time that the Jennings thing was being shown, so I saw it up in the president's television. Well, the president hadn't come in yet. And Peter Jennings had said at the very end of the broadcast that when asked about how well the president played saxophone, I said adequately. And so Jennings says, well, I wonder how he's going to explain to the president that it was adequate. So I did get the chance to explain to the president that, to paraphrase the same thing that Senator Dole had said, he set me up. But I had a wonderful reception with the president and the first lady, and my granddaughter got the personal request to see Socks the cat, and they brought out Socks on a leash, and she walked Socks through all the staterooms. It was a memorable time. It was a great time to leave. The Marine Band is the oldest professional continuous musical organization in the United States. It dates back to the 11th of July, 1798. It was a band that Sousa became the 17th director of, and he was director of the Marine Band. He's usually, by many people, think that he's the first director, but as I say, he's the 17th. He was director from 1880 to 1892. Sousa's father was a member of the Marine Band, was a trombonist who traveled with Lincoln to Gettysburg, on the train with Gettysburg. So the band is really an historical national American institution. The band started originally in the same instrumentation as a harmony music: 2 oboes, 2 clarinets, 2 French horns, bassoon, a bass drum, and fifes and drums. Gradually evolved into the 1820s, 30s, 40s into a larger harmony music. During the Civil War period, it's interesting that the band was not a band with over-the-shoulder instruments. It was called a clarinet band. The leader of the band played clarinet, E-flat clarinet. So the instrumentation was a wind band. When Sousa became director, he expanded the instrumentation and the repertory and the discipline, musical discipline within. And the band grew at the turn of that century into, I'd say, about 65 players. The present Marine Band, the band that I conducted, had 145 musicians. 20 or so are string players who are the nucleus of the White House Orchestra, supplemented by the wind, brass, percussion of the regular band. And you will rarely see the entire Marine Band of, say, 100 wind, brass, percussion, except on inaugural concerts, the inaugural parade. We will function as a concert band, ceremonial band, string quartet, brass quintet, woodwind quintets, brass ensembles, chamber orchestra, symphony orchestra, anything that is required, since the function of the band, or shall we say that the mission of the band, every military organization has a mission, and the mission of the Marine Band is to provide music for the President of the United States and the Commandant of the Marine Corps as directed. To become a member of the band, there first must be a vacancy. The vacancy is advertised, and the person comes to Washington to compete, very much or very similar to a symphony audition. You audition anonymously behind a screen, and for a jury of the assistant directors, the section leaders, principal players. The best player wins the audition may be accepted, not necessarily. Many times we will have auditions for, say, a clarinet position. There will be 75, 80 players who audition. We'll go through finals, and they may take one, they may not take one. And it's very competitive. And the typical applicant, I would say, generally today, is graduate, undergraduate performance most of the time, and also, let's say I would say that 95% have the baccalaureate, 75% have their master's, and then a good 20% have the doctorate. So, but that is not a requirement. The best player, provided there are also, you must be able to obtain a White House clearance for performance at the White House. And background, you must also fit the physical profile, weight, what have you, health. Basic training is waived. We are the only element of the military service that does not go through basic training. And the rationale for that is that you come technically proficient, and it doesn't cost the government 1 cent to train you. So you are a professional. You come in at the rank of staff sergeant, which is E6, and you go through the pyramid ending at E9, which is master gunnery sergeant, the super top. And we have director, 2 assistant directors, a drum major. The directorate comes traditionally from the band. I was a horn player and on the arranging staff. In 1974, I was appointed assistant director, and then I became director in 1979. I have sort of a different distinction there. As I say, the band does not go through basic training. I did go through basic and had gone through one of the field bands. And the field, there's a subtle difference in the title of the band. The field bands are the Marine Corps bands. There are 12 of them, are called Marine Corps bands. The band in Washington is called the United States Marine Band, or you may call it the Band of the Marine Corps. And also the other physical differentiation is that the band is redcoats in Washington. And that goes back to the old tradition of the British tradition that the musicians wear the reverse colors of the regiment. You notice that Marine blues, as we see normally, are blue with red piping. The Marine band is red. And the same, similar to the uniforms that John Philip Sousa wore, with the frogging and many buttons and white epaulets on the musicians and gold epaulets on the directorate. If you're in the Marine Corps or a Marine Corps band, you can become a member of the Marine band, but you still must audition competitively against the group of perhaps civilians that are auditioning for the position. We have people who have come from the Marine Corps, I being one, and also I think someone had asked whether there are women in the band. Yes, there have been women in the band since 1972. And why weren't there women before? I guess women basically did not come to audition. And I think with the advent of the women's movement, women did come to audition and have won not only positions, but many of the principal players are female. How does one prepare for an audition with the band? It would be the same way as you would audition for a symphony orchestra. We send out a list of what the repertoire would be for the audition. Say, whatever solo or concerto is required, orchestral passages, excerpts, and then sight reading. Because the band does, I would say, sometimes over 700 performances a year. That's, of course, various groups. And we have very limited time for rehearsal. And many times we have performances with no rehearsals. So it's got to be perfect each time. Obviously, you're looking for the finest player but the finest player also has to fit into the ensemble. Many times in an audition, someone from the panel will ask for the passage to be played differently than indicated. And the best advice I could give to a performer is that not to challenge the request, because the request is to say that you can perhaps be flexible, you can adjust to a request of not only the conductor, but also of the ensemble, because many things, I think I've mentioned, or I'd like to use the analogy of grading pearls. How do they fit as a group on this string that's going to become this fine necklace? I've always found, or not always, but I've found that clarinetists or at challenge, you say, well, I want that softer. And someone says, well, I have to sacrifice the sound. And of course, I've spent millions of dollars developing this wonderful, vibrant sound. And you say, well, that's very nice, but it's pianissimo, and it's got to be pianissimo for the entire ensemble. And at times, it takes a bit of working to do that. And bands can play, I feel, as soft as orchestras. It's a matter of, the conductor is the last of the autocrats, and that's the only way you can get it, by saying, but that's not soft enough. As a Marine band musician, you have every opportunity to play almost every type and style of music. Obviously, let's say at the White House, that you do Mozart symphonies, Haydn symphonies, Bach, Brandenburg Concerti, elevator music, background music. You may accompany various groups, and then someone comes in and is a rock singer, and we have to form a group to back that. We've done Broadway musicals where they brought the musical to the house, and we were the house band. Well, I had great time in when a tribute to Richard Rodgers, and they brought stars from the Met over, and we did Carousel on the White House lawn. And also, with Cynthia Gregory, I became the ballet conductor to conduct for Miss Gregory. Many times, the only specialized players we might have, of course, would be a guitarist. But the pianist, our pianists we have two classical pianists, and the rest would be combo pianists, but also supreme readers. They have to read, including the harpist. And that's why we have an emphasis on sight reading. We have, amongst other treasures in the library, or in the band itself, is a Sousa tradition, which we carry on. I would say that it would be very unusual for a band concert, a tour band concert, not to include or perhaps open with the Sousa March. And generally there are encores, even with that might be quite contemporary band repertory, could be transcriptions. Remember, bands were the aegis of bringing music to the American public, way before orchestras, in some cases, existed, but bands that traveled, introduced Verdi and Wagner and Puccini to the American public, long before the radio or what have you, or even orchestras or opera companies. So a lot of that is still in a traditional program, and we call the word transcriptions. Sousa always played transcriptions. He played a lot of original music. He played also, Sousa is credited for introducing ragtime to the United States with his band. We get Scott Joplin introduced through Sousa. He introduced, interestingly, we think of marches, that he wrote 130 odd marches, but he did not just play marches. He played serious music, classical music, ragtime, a lot of novelettes, but marches were usually encores. And it's also interesting to see that the March to the Washington Post is known as a dance step, and it introduced the two-step and became the rage of Europe. So we still maintain that tradition. In fact, if you go on to any Marine Band concert on tour, the band tours every year in the fall. It used to be up to 12 weeks. Well, now I think it's a little less than that in a different section of the country each year. But I would say that even if you went to a Marine Band concert today, the last number on the first half of the program, or right prior to intermission, would be an encore, and it would be Semper Fidelis, the Sousa March. And then I think that the concert would generally end with Stars and Stripes Forever. For a young person aspiring to go to the Marine Band, first of all, he should have a major teacher, either from a university, a conservatory, and practice, obviously, is, if he's hoping to use that as his job, it's just like exercising every day. It's you have to practice. It's not going to happen without it. It's developing both the muscular skills that are required, the physical skills, the mental skills, and just the dexterity of the instrument. It doesn't happen without practice. I mean, we all sort of wish it would, and for many of us it's a chore, but it just does not. There are very few people who can just pick up an instrument and toss it off as though it were the best thing in the world. But there again, to be a member of the Marine Band, it has to be the best thing you do.